If you've seen more than a few episodes of the channel, you will know that I'm a native of southern Appalachia who happened to get some book learning in such diverse places as Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Michigan, and Scotland. As a child, I was struck by how many times I was told by maternal family members that they didn't know where our family or our folks originated, but my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee Indian. On my dad's side, I heard similar claims, but this time my fourth great-grandfather was a Cherokee chief named James Van, a relative of the comedian and social commentator Will Rogers, a really real person. Now, genetic studies and family tree work have replaced some of my family's myths with verifiable facts, but before genetic studies were commonplace, I used my skills as a cultural geographer to trace the origins of the culture that was practiced by the folks in my home community. First, I traced the use of words like yuns, hankering to, fixing to, aiming to, and expressions like deader than 4 o'clock. Other items like moonshine or whiskey, music and songs, stories and tales, as well as basic faith tenets like there ain't no Bible like the King James Bible, told me a similar origin story of a people who left a bonny land that they loved, yet they knew they would never go home. If they loved it, you might ask, why did they leave the glens and moorlands of Scotland, the English border country, and Ireland? In a sense, and just as the Israelites before them, they were going on an errand into the wilderness. But unlike the children of Israel, there was no promised land to which to return. If anything, they believed they were going to their promised land. When my maternal great-grandmother, or grandmother I should say, who was born and raised in the mountains of western North Carolina, she never met a Catholic in her entire life, but nonetheless, she told me that Catholics were drunkards and followed an evil pope. I suspected that her worldview was shaped by events and historical figures that have long since disappeared from the collective memory of local folks, including my beloved grandmother. She didn't have any idea where those ideas came from. She was just taught them as a child. There was one more cultural trait in southern Appalachia that caught my attention that pointed to deep historical events and mindsets forged in them. There's an abiding fear of a strong centralized government in southern Appalachia, although New Deal programs of FDR presented an odd paradox for a generation or two. Because more than a few people have asked me why there are so many people of Scottish and Irish ancestry residing in southern Appalachia, I've decided to produce a series of talks that explore the various reasons that have been presented by scholars and dedicated family historians. Now, I've been doing research on this for about 30 years, so obviously I'm going to rely on a lot of my own research. Now, I've done that research on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm pushing aside mythical stories of kilts, skene dhus, and lone pioneers killing bears when they were only 3 in the greenest state in the land of the free, Davy Crockett. Instead, we're going to take a sober look at the political, religious, and ethnic factors that played roles in creating waves of people from Scotland and the border country of England to Ireland and then on to America. I hope you'll join me. To appreciate why Ireland was the first step in colonial or imperial expansion for the English and Scottish crown, you must appreciate the fact that the native Irish were Gaelic speakers and staunchly Catholics, Roman Catholics that is, and they shared a deep ethnic roots with Highland and Island Scots. More importantly, for the monarchy at least, the Irish were potential allies to England's Catholic enemies, Spain and France. So beginning with the Tudor dynasty, they set about to either exterminate the Irish or force radical cultural change in them. The Tudors and Stuarts didn't want enemies on their eastern, southern, and western shores. Prior to the reign of James I, it was the policy of Tudor monarchs, especially Mary and Elizabeth, to either exterminate the rebellious Irish or force them into adopting English culture. Thankfully, neither Queen Mary's plantation in mid-Leinster nor Queen Elizabeth's more ambitious efforts in Munster achieved their goals. In Ulster by 1603, the year that Elizabeth died and James became the King of England as well as the King of Scotland, the effects of 9 years of war against Irish chieftains O'Neill and O'Donnell left the land ravaged and depopulated. Adding to the misery of this war, which was fought in the name of Elizabeth I, was famine across the bogs, hills, and mountains of the north of Ireland. Ulster's plantation was literally reduced by terror and famine. Sir Arthur Chichester summed up the role of his forces when making a strike into Ulster. "We spare none of what quality or sex soever, and it hath bred much terror in the people, who heard not a drum there or saw a fire of long time." An English settler wrote in 1610 that Ulster presents herself in a ragged sabled robe. Ragged there remaineth nothing but ruins and desolation, with very little show of humanity. In about 1600, military leaders of the English forces in Ulster estimated that the Gaelic Irish could muster an army of about 8,592 men. By multiplying that figure by 4 to account for nuclear families, Michael Percival Maxwell provides an estimate, a population estimate that is, of between 25 and 40,000 native or Gaelic Irish people in Ulster at the turn of the 17th century. Now, the population density would have ranged from 1.13 to 1.8 people per square kilometer, depending upon which total population figure one uses. To show the impact of the Tudor campaigns on Ulster's people, it's helpful to compare population density for all of Ireland to Ulster. My old colleague Ian White from the University of Lancaster estimates that Ireland had a population density of about 33.89 people per square kilometer in 1600, so Ulster's population was nearly decimated. The ravages of war and famine left a population vacuum in Ulster. The population in the Scottish lowlands, which was concentrated in the Lothians and the central belt regions and along coastal areas, was about 14.29 people per square kilometer, which was less than half that of Ireland outside of Ulster. Population density in the farming hinterland of the coastal boroughs was much greater than for inland Scottish areas. For farming and fishing populations pressed against the Irish Sea and the Scottish lowlands, the openness of the lands in Ulster was attractive. That openness was certainly used by James VI and I to lure anglicized settlers into the decimated lands of Ulster. As Reverend Robert Blair wrote in his autobiography in reference to the early years of the plantation, "The wolf and the woodkern were great enemies to those first planters, but the long-rested land yielded to the labourers such plentiful increase that many followed the first assayers." With respect to the later years, 1652 to 1672, White points out that tenant farmers from southwestern Scottish lowlands who immigrated to Ulster enjoyed better tenurial conditions than they had at home in the lowlands. In short, there was a greater potential to earn a living off rented land in Ireland than there was in Scotland. Despite better economic conditions by 1610, native Irish guerrilla groups called woodkerns, to which Blair referred, resurfaced to harass Protestant settlers. Before the plantation era, they were a thorny problem for rival Gaelic lords. Small bands of them would come out of the woods to pillage the farms of new settlers, before retreating once again to the safety of the trees, which was a tactic also used by Native Americans and incorrectly applied to the Scots-Irish frontiersmen in Appalachia. Make no mistake about it, folks, the Scots-Irish knew how to fight a guerrilla campaign when they landed in America. In fact, their history of being the vanguard against Irish Gaels and the border English is one of the reasons why they were recruited by land developers like William Penn. In America, they were pitted against the native tribes, so they had a long history of being political pawns in a bloody game of geopolitics on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. At any rate, laws in Ulster were passed to curb the woodkern's Robin Hood-like activities. A captured woodkern could be shot without trial, but it was common for them to be taken alive and paraded through a local village to a public place of execution. Sir Arthur Chichester eventually permitted the guerrillas to leave Ireland, ostensibly to enlist in the forces of Gustavus Adolphus, so they could be used against James' Spanish opponents. Once again, the monarchy is using people as mere pawns in geopolitical games. James believed he understood the principal reason for the failure of earlier attempts to anglicize Ireland. He reasoned that the Tudors' efforts to solve the Irish problem of rebellion and backwardness failed because there simply were not enough Scots and English settlers. For a century, English settlers, including Normans, had assimilated into the dominant Irish population and became part of the so-called problem. When he ascended the English throne in 1603, when Elizabeth died, James enthusiastically inherited the Tudors' scheme to anglicize the native Irish. The plantation of Ulster was a project that he attacked with intense personal interest, declaring its objectives with the always of a Christian prince to endeavour. The king was already experienced at trying to settle Gaelic areas without anglicized colonists. From 1597 to 1607, he tried unsuccessfully to plant Protestants on the Isle of Lewis and Kintyre. The establishment of permanent Scottish settlements in Ulster was the direct result of the experience and acuity, though short-sighted, of the king himself. The newly formed Scots-Irish, Scotch-Irish, or Ulster Scots community was a product of a political policy aimed at social engineering a perceived problem with the Gaels in Ulster. In many ways, that policy led to bloodshed in Ireland for the next 400 years, while their descendants helped yank the American colonies from their overlords in Westminster. The work of Chichester, a dedicated English Puritan and Lord Deputy of Ireland who helped to decimate Ulster's Gaelic population during the Tudor Wars, was an important aid to James in the enabler of Puritan ministerial recruitment in the monarchy-controlled Church of Ireland. Several Scots ministers were brought over to serve in the Church of Ireland, and a large portion of them carried with them a deep and abiding wish to serve God in Christendom under the auspices of an ecclesiastical body that was structured along the lines of Presbyterianism. These ministers and their English compatriots like John Ridge and Henry Colward built the foundation through instruction for a laity hungry for their own, but unfortunately for the king, dissenting Presbyterian non-established church. In American terms, they didn't want a state-controlled church, but they expected the government to protect it and acknowledge Christ as Lord and Savior, not deny him. That's an important distinction to make for those who think that any mention of God or Christ is crossing the line of the separation of church and state doctrine in the United States. That may be in their minds because they're not believers, but historically that's not an accurate statement of fact. The Jacobean, or James's, plan envisioned a major role for the monarch's institution of Protestant religion to play. For James I was interested in creating an environment in which an anglicized way of life would be seen as a better alternative to that of the native Irish, who were a staunch Catholics. He felt that this situation was best accomplished through the homogenizing of religion, the introducing of civil order and government amongst a godless, lawless, and disordered people. His policy and method were based on his belief in the superiority of English culture. According to his plan, Protestant settlers from England and Scotland would provide the Gaelic-speaking Irish Catholics with cultural and political role models to envy and emulate. For, as Jane Oldmeyer points out, the king and his officials in Dublin, Edinburgh, and London viewed the peripheral regions in the realm with worry. She notes that their inhabitants were classified as barbarians, rebels, and subversives intent on destabilizing the peripheries of the British monarchies. In 1609, at the behest of the king, the Privy Council authorized advertisements to solicit applications for Protestant planters who would in turn recruit Protestant settlers. The king's ability to carry out his scheme of planting Ulster with Protestants was made possible by the seizing of lands vacated by the fleeing Catholic earls of Tyrone and Tyrconnell. Their lands occupied 6 counties in Ulster, and with them James I had sufficient lands to plant large numbers of Protestants from Great Britain, which would include Scotland, England, and Wales. The king had in previous years granted large tracts of lands on the northeast coast of Ireland to the Hamilton and Montgomery families, mainly in counties Down and Antrim. Those grants of land, along with 6 counties cheated by the fleeing earls, gave James the opportunity to plant most of the 9 counties in Ulster. This was a unique situation for an English monarch bent on socially and culturally transforming the native Irish. In our next installment in the series, we'll take a deeper look at some of the roots for ethnic and regional hostilities that led to the troubles in Ulster and the southern Appalachian folks' resistance to a strong central government. I hope you got something out of the discussion today, and will join me again here on The Vantage Point. God bless you and yours. Bye-bye.